I want to welcome folks back to our 35th Zoom interview. I'm David Richards, coming from the Margaret Chase Smith Library in Skowhegan. And my guest today is David Leigh. And David, where are you coming to us from?
I'm from Belgrade.
Okay. And David is going to talk to us today about a very special project that he worked on as a teacher that involved magazine covers. So David, can you give us a brief overview of what that project was?
Well, yes, I'd be glad to. I've been doing this, it's hard to count up the years, for 49 years. The first effort that students in Jackman made to send the covers of either Time or Newsweek magazines off to the people featured on the covers and ask them to sign the covers and send them back. And the very first was during the 1972 presidential election, and it was Eleanor McGovern. And the young lady who got it was quite excited. That was our very first. She, by the way, sometimes accompanies me on various speaking engagements with her husband. He's now 65 years old on Medicare.
Wow.
So it's a nice connection. So from those very humble beginnings, the collection now includes 1,100 autographed covers from Time, Newsweek, the occasional U.S. News and World Report, and the dates go back until 1938.
Okay.
So to give some idea as far as the range, as far as time, this was the earliest. This is Frank Capra, who we're very fortunate to get. You know, he lived well into his 90s.
And tell people why Frank Capra is famous. What he did.
Frank Capra did It's a Wonderful Life. And in addition to, in 1938, he was preparing to do a lot of films in support of the war, as far as the danger of Nazism and fascism in Europe. And he, of course, experienced that as a young man earlier. So this was his go. But I think It's a Wonderful Life, which has now become a Christmas classic, was directed by him. Yeah. So that was 1938.
So I'm going to do a little Margaret Chase Smith, 6 Degrees of Separation.
Yeah, that's correct.
A Wonderful Life stars Jimmy Stewart. And Margaret Chase Smith's connection to Jimmy Stewart is in the late 1950s. The Pentagon wanted to promote him to a general. He was in the Air Force Reserves, and she blocked it because he had not done his required service, his military training. And the Pentagon's counter was, oh, well, he had just made a film called The Strategic Air Command, and that should count towards his service time. And Margaret Chase Smith said if that was true, his co-star, June Allison, should also be made a general.
Good for her. My aunt was the secretary at the Princeton Inn in Princeton, New Jersey, and Jimmy Stewart was a graduate, and she spoke very fondly of him every time he came for alumni visits.
She had no ill feeling towards Jimmy Stewart.
No,
it was more towards the Pentagon.
Absolutely.
And, we have a great photo of her with Jimmy Stewart and Danny Kaye at an awards ceremony.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, so you're going to move on to another cover.
Well, the most recent. So this means then 10 decades. The most recent was a medical fellow working with the pandemic last year. In northern New Jersey. So this is from the 20s. So that means that the 30s up to the 20s, that's 10 decades of responses, which has been very gratifying.
1930s to the 2020s.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And now, also on the oldest, there was a nice run, David, because the next week after Frank Capra was Happy Chandler.
Okay.
Happy Chandler was on because he was then governor of Kentucky, but of course he went on to become baseball commissioner, and he plays a somewhat minor role in the Jackie Robinson story of the film 42. He was baseball commissioner, and again living well into their 90s which made it possible for students to get this in the 1990s.
Okay, very good.
And then finally, from the 1938 was William McChesney Martin, who was Federal Reserve Chairman for years,
Mhm.
an economist in the Security Exchange Commission, a commissioner for President Roosevelt.
Mhm.
So we're talking about, some mighty years,
Yeah.
between that and then finally, Jimmy Doolittle,
Mhm.
which I was very pleased with. I believe the last of the Doolittle Raiders died, I believe, this year. Those that made that famous raid, of course, in the early part of the war, bombed
Mhm.
parts of Japan and then crashed, all of them crash landed, some safely and some not, in China,
Mhm.
just to make a psychological point in the early part of World War II. And then of the older ones, this one, Senator Smith, was a huge help with because Madame
Mhm.
Chiang Kai-shek, they were great friends, corresponded regularly.
Mhm.
And I mentioned to the senator, we're having trouble contacting her. And she very nicely said, don't worry, send me the cover and I will get it to you.
Oh, okay.
And she got it to Madame Chiang Kai-shek and then got it back. She was living part of the year in Long Island and then
Yeah.
part in Taiwan.
Mhm.
Now, again, as far as the range of these covers, I have sort of spread out a bit. This one, for instance, I have used at a high school in Taiwan.
Yeah.
And the kids were quite impressed and
Mhm.
enthused. My son taught there for 7 years.
Mhm.
And so this cover has been used a lot. It's gone to Taiwan.
Mhm.
Others have gone to Canada. Others have gone to the Caribbean and also to Europe. Because I have generated some interest in this, in that my wife and I have been fortunate enough to go on cruises to the Caribbean, to Canada, and to Europe,
Mhm.
making a competitive operation between here's the covers, here's the descriptions. Please try to match the descriptions to the faces, and it's gone very well.
Mhm.
So they've been used on three continents.
Very good. How did this project get its start?
Well, David, I'm glad that you asked me to do this because yesterday it sparked me to call the person who inspired me,
Oh, okay.
a fellow one year behind me in college. He had started this in the 50s when he
Mhm.
was in high school. I called him yesterday. He lives in Pennsylvania. He stopped doing it. He has 300.
Okay.
Robert Frost, I think, was probably his most noteworthy.
Mhm.
And this summer, he is going to come again to a camp in Sydney across the lake.
Oh,
So
very
we're going to
nice.
see each other for the first time in 50 years.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
And now he had a story. I had to talk to him yesterday to confirm this before I spread this tale because it sounds too much to be true.
Mhm.
He was minding his own business as a freshman in college in 1962, and he received a letter from the dean of the college, quite
Mhm.
stern. Took him down, please, an interview with me, and he did. And the dean relayed to him that the FBI was checking on a freshman in college who was receiving New Year's Day cards from President Nasser from Egypt.
Hmm.
Because not only had Shirley gotten the autograph from President Nasser, a few years later, he continued to get New Year's Day cards. And of course, there was no diplomatic relations between the two countries then.
Mhm.
So the FBI was quite concerned that
Oh,
what
interesting.
is going on here? And what is going on here with this fellow? Well, anyway, he assured him that it was nothing more than a request for an autograph, and took it from there.
Mhm.
So that was my initial spark.
Mhm. And you talked about a recent one that you had received. So is this a project that you are
Yes.
continue to carry on?
Yes, I am. However, the market has dried up completely.
Mhm.
eBay has put a very, very immediate stop to this, because people, rightfully so, think, I send this to this person this week, and 2 weeks from now it'll be on eBay and sold for quite a bit of money.
Okay.
So my batting average, which used to be quite high, is really very, very low. Very
Oh,
low.
interesting.
Very low.
Mhm.
People that I would think automatically other years would do it, and now they don't. The astronauts, for instance, David, have as a unit have said, we're not doing it.
Mhm.
We're simply not doing it, because people are abusing our generosity
Mhm.
and profiting from it with very little effort, with
Yeah.
very little work.
So I want to focus on that there's more to the project than just you getting signatures on magazine covers, is that you are a teacher. You very much use this as part of your teaching. So can you talk about that aspect?
Well, absolutely, yes. By the time I've been retired now for 18 years, but near the end, near the last 10 years of my career, when I did U.S. history, well, world history, 20th century history, once we did the 1960s, we closed the library, and I laid out 90 covers that had to do with personalities from the 1960s, and 4 students and 1 teacher, each group, would compete to see how fast they could match the 90. That was a good number.
Mhm.
And inevitably, every year, 1 hour and 20 minutes later, the first group was done.
Mhm.
It took them 1 hour and 20 minutes of really concentrated work
Mhm.
to do that.
Mhm.
And since then, I've used them at various professional and social organizations throughout Maine,
Mhm.
and also out of state. For instance, medical doctors. The collection includes Dr. Salk,
Mhm.
includes Christian Bernard, the first heart transplant
Dr.
physician.
Salk, the polio.
The polio vaccine, yes. So that's been good. And I used this a couple of years ago at the Maine Medical Association. And same format. Here are the descriptions. Here are the matches. Go ahead. And some of the doctors cut their classes at 1 o'clock. They should have been back to school. Should have been back to school at 1 o'clock for sessions. And some of them just simply did not go because they
Mhm.
wanted to finish that last 15 minutes and get the half a pint of maple syrup. So I said, you've got to go. You've got to go. You've got to get back. They didn't. And
Now,
the athletic directors, same thing. Of course, they were also very competitive.
Mhm. Did you have the students involved in the project from the standpoint of helping to secure the autographs?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, oh, absolutely. They did it. In fact, one student, this is how it's changed, received 4 in one day.
Mhm.
4 in one day to herself.
Mhm.
And it's very gratifying. Did this in Jackman and then in Mcchesney. I was in Mcchesney a number of years ago. A young lady came running up to me and said, Mr. Leigh, how are you? And I got Sugar Ray Leonard.
Mm.
So 20
Okay.
years later, she was well aware of who she got.
So they take pride in whose
Oh,
autographs
yes.
they're able to
Oh,
secure.
yes. They can rattle that off. And one student in Jackman, I think, must have gotten 30 or so.
Mhm. How would you find addresses for these people?
Well, Current Biography was a publication, which of course is now out of business because of the internet.
Mhm.
But they would feature 15 people a month, maybe,
Mhm.
and they had their addresses in there and sometimes
Mhm.
phone numbers.
Mhm.
However, Who's Who in America helped. And again, people were willing to put their addresses
Mhm.
and phone numbers in. I don't think they are now for various reasons.
Mhm.
And in Jackman, especially in the early years, I would be on the phone with the library in Orono and say, oh, good, you found this person. You found
Mhm.
this person. That's good. You found this person. And then I really had to use some, like I said, I bet you can't find this fourth person. This is probably impossible to get. And the person said, oh, yes, I can. And off they went, and they called back and said they did get it. I knew when to get off the phone. I knew when the jig was up, as far as saying, no, you cannot impose any more on this person.
Yeah.
But that was the means, and it was quite successful.
And let people know where you taught.
Well, I started this in Jackman, and in fact, 150 or so of those covers are still there.
Oh, okay.
They watch them very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're very good about keeping them under wraps and displaying them sometimes. So that I trust that.
Mm-hmm.
Also did it in Mcchesney, I was principal in Mcchesney, and had great luck there. This was all volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
Students were not made to do this.
Okay.
They did it during their study hall. So it was not class time. And there must have been 200 there, which
Mm-hmm.
I left.
Okay.
My secretary watched them like a hawk.
Mm-hmm.
She protected them like a hen collecting eggs or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But however, when she died, the other people involved said, "Listen, you take them."
Mm-hmm.
Because I offered them to the University of Maine, Mcchesney, and they didn't want to take responsibility, so I did.
Mm-hmm.
Not as much great luck in two other high schools where I did leave a few, and they got taken.
Mm-hmm.
They got taken.
Mm-hmm.
No, weren't many, but still, it's too bad.
Yeah. So there are 1,100 altogether. Do you have at least copies of all 1,100? Or
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, except for the 150 or so in Jackman, I've got. So I have 1,000 upstairs in the safe. Yes.
I was going to ask you where you keep them
I
all.
bought a safe.
Okay.
I had to. Yeah, I had to. You know, the interesting human interest stories here. This is one of my favorites. People may remember that in the early 90s, there was a case where a woman, a young girl at the time, had a very unusual disease, and they simply could not cure it unless they had a genetic match.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, the parents had another child,
Okay. Yeah.
thus providing the match. So here is 1991. Here is the teenage girl and her 1-year-old sister.
Mm-hmm.
Here is the note from the mother from 1993 saying both of them are doing well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry to take so long to get this back.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2010, this girl now graduated from high school in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the sister is also 18 years older.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an update. This is an update from 2011, where she is out of high school for a number of years, and they're both doing very, very well.
So one of the points is this isn't just celebrities that you're trying to get. Yeah.
No, absolutely not.
And is your goal to get every human that is on a cover?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I always ask, now, for instance, on this one, I asked, how many other requests did you get?
Mm-hmm.
And on the back, she said approximately 15.
Oh, interesting.
15. There's a fellow who grew up in Winslow. There's a camp in Oakland and used to jog by our house. He's in the military. He was in Lebanon. They said, stop, we want to take a picture of you. And that's him. So I have a neighbor here who was on Newsweek when he was in the trenches in Lebanon in the early 80s. Yeah.
Do you actively have some requests out now?
Oh, yes. Yes, quite a few.
Yeah.
Quite a few. Let me see. Boy, I should, yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do. Let me think
And you
this.
talked about how eBay has changed things because the concern now is that people are just marketing these. Do you have a sense of like what your success rate was 20, 30 years ago and what the success rate is now?
I would say 55, 60%.
Oh, back in
maybe
the
even a
day.
little higher.
What's it gone
Maybe a
down
little
to
higher.
now?
Yes, it's down to batting average below 200.
Oh,
No.
then interesting. Hmm.
Or less.
So along the way, I mean, even back in the day, it was there were many people you weren't getting. Are there ones that you really wished that you could get in the collection?
Let me see. Bob Dylan
Okay.
sent something back, a stock photo.
Mm-hmm.
Tiger Woods,
Mm-hmm.
Michael Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried numerous times, and it's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's not happening. However, there are some quite valuable ones. Alger Hiss, for one. Alger Hiss, of course, went to prison because of his testimony, perjury, in front of congressional hearings, and
This is back during the McCarthy era.
during the McCarthy era. Yes, yes. So in 1978, there were additional information coming out,
Mm-hmm.
which really somewhat certified his guilt. You know, I think there was people defending him. People were not. That information, once it came out, was not good,
Mm-hmm.
and he was again on the cover.
Okay. Yeah.
And got him. So
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee Williams. Tennessee Williams is difficult to get, and he was very cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I made a list here of how I have used this in different groups, competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in something like this, I've learned that it's sort of like shuffling the cards. You could have one person who could be used in a number of different situations, and to see that person differently, it helps. For instance, one of my favorites is you can find them in the dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
A person's last name is in the dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, let me give you some examples. Mickey Mantle,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Vanna White,
Mm-hmm.
Henry Cabot Lodge,
Mm-hmm.
Thurgood Marshall,
Mm-hmm.
Dan Rather.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole series of about 40 of them.
Mm-hmm.
You say, oh yeah, that person's last name is a common noun or an adjective or even an adverb.
Mm-hmm.
Another that I've just recently run is called I Can Hear the Music with just musicians
Mm-hmm.
across the range. James Taylor, Roberta Flack, Joan Baez, Leonard Bernstein, Ringo Starr.
Mm-hmm. Which that raises a question that just occurred to me. Have you secured some of these in person?
Yes, well, including Senator Smith.
Okay.
Including Senator Smith. And the only other one was Bob Feller,
Okay.
the Hall of Fame pitcher for the Cleveland Indians.
Mm-hmm.
Who's not the most agreeable person.
I was going to say he has a reputation for not being.
Know that? How do you know that, David?
From baseball tours I used to go on, and he was a very prickly personality for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I'm proud of you, David. That's good. That's good. He's the only one I ever paid for too.
Oh, interesting.
I had to pay him $15 in Augusta. Are you surprised?
I'm surprised that you got it, but now I know how you got it.
Yeah,
You paid for it.
That's right. 15. There's only two. Then the only two in person.
Okay.
And the only one I had to pay for.
Mm-hmm. So otherwise, the project was about sending these off and then hoping it would come back.
But the kids got so excited when the mail truck pulled up. Said, who'd we get? Who'd we get? And then again, talking about shuffling the cards, as far as looking at people from a different context,
Mm-hmm.
I am in a beer brewing group.
Mm-hmm.
So for Christmas, our December meeting, I do one of these competitive program, and the last one was having to do with beer or alcohol. Bodie Miller.
Oh, Miller, yeah. Yeah.
Barbara Bush,
Mm-hmm.
Lamar Alexander,
That one you have to explain to me.
Brandy Alexander.
Oh, okay, okay.
Brandy
Alcohol.
Alexander.
It's not just
And
beer, it's
yeah,
alcohol.
alcohol.
Yeah.
And then the president of Yale many years ago, Kingman Brewster.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So there's 25 of them, had to do with alcohol, spirits,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
with spirits.
And then you have historical themes as well. For example, we've been discussing that next year is the 50th anniversary of Watergate,
Yes.
and that you had put together a collection that would focus on Watergate. And what you had sent me is also the trivia questions that you ask, just so that you can, on the basis of the questions, try to figure out who the personality is.
And you did very, very well.
Well, I sort of came of age during Watergate, so I actually spent a lot of time watching the Watergate hearings.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But though, that's why 1972, 1973, 1974 was a perfect time to do this.
Oh, that's about the time you're getting started, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Because not only did you have that, but you also had the World War II generation of leaders still alive,
Mm-hmm.
and many of them in office. I don't think they went to the office every day to work.
Mm-hmm.
But Chiang Kai-shek, Mao Zedong, Tito, Franco, they were all still alive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not that I got their signatures, but it was easy to make the connection.
Mm-hmm.
Then also you had the George Washingtons of their countries, the emerging African and Asian countries, who again were noteworthy because they were George Washingtons.
Mm-hmm.
So it was easy to teach that. And then with Watergate, easy to connect with various people who were getting churned up. They wouldn't be famous if it wasn't for Watergate, but they became so.
You mentioned the astronauts. Another thing as I was growing up that I was very focused on is the space program. Yes. I know you have at least one astronaut.
Well, yeah, I would say a dozen.
Okay.
At least a dozen. John Glenn, not Neil Armstrong, who was very wary.
Yeah.
And wouldn't do it. Generally. Armstrong don't have John Glenn, Gordon Cooper, and maybe about 7 or 8 others.
Okay.
That were at one time quite good. The president of Eastern Airlines.
Frank Borman.
Frank Borman, yes, was very good about was very good about that. But they've stopped.
Yeah, it's as a policy.
That's
right.
Right.
Yeah.
They've stopped.
So there'll be no Jessica Meyer cover.
No.
Or Chris Cassidy.
No.
Two main.
Although one theme that comes through is the number of Mainers.
So share with us.
Very impressive. Very impressive. And I don't know, there's been 4 U.S. senators between Ed Muskie, Margaret Chase Smith, Bill Cohen, and George Mitchell. I don't think another state would have more. I sort of quick memory here, but if not, that's very impressive. Very impressive. Stephen King. Has been very of course, the Rockefellers, both David and Nelson, have strong Maine ties. They're not Mainers, but they have strong Maine ties.
Summer in Maine.
The fellow who ran by my house here.
Oh yeah. Because they don't all have to be famous people.
Glenn Ross, who was longtime sheriff of Penobscot County, was on, and he was on because of nuisance lawsuits. There was a minister, a psychologist, and him on Newsweek, and the theme was some people are abusing the legal system. And Glenn Ross was on because in the late fall, before the snow, someone had committed a robbery of some sort, and the police were after him. They couldn't get him. They said, that's all right. Tomorrow, we'll get him tomorrow. And the fellow was so cold that night hiding out in the woods that he sued the Penobscot Police Department for not getting him the night before and giving him a warm spot to stay that night. We had a program at the State Library, and Glenn Ross came and relayed that story. It was nice to see him. And there's Walter Ulmer, who was a general in the 80s or so. He's well into his 80s himself, lives in Brewer during the summer, and he came with his wife. It was very good. Very good. There was a fellow from Bar Harbor who used to jump off cliffs, and he would jump off the cliffs of the rocks in Bar Harbor, and he was on the cover of Time, believe it or not. And I tracked him down in Georgia, where he lived. And I said, "How did you ever find me?" Well, you know, we did. So Maine has been well represented.
Very good. So as we move towards wrapping up, I want to review the different ways that you've used this. You used it in the classroom.
Yes.
You talk about how you've used it on these cruises and these professional organizations. You still use it for education.
Yes.
You've alluded to exhibits. You talked about the one that you did at the Maine State Library a couple of years ago.
Yes.
I want to move into some photos because you also did an exhibit here back in 2008. So I'm going to go to share screen. And this is one display case.
Yes.
On the, it's probably a little hard for people to see, but I'll give some orientation. On the left-hand side is a Time magazine cover from 1960 when Margaret Chase Smith was running against Lucia Cormier.
And here is that very cover.
Yeah, had run against one another. And in the middle is the Madam Chiang Kai-shek cover. And on the right-hand side is the John Glenn Time magazine cover. And then so this is the Margaret Chase Smith, Lucia Cormier cover. And this is you giving a tour of the exhibit to a group from Jackman, the senior citizens group. You said every person who was there that day had a child who was in your class.
That's right. 4 or 5 women, and all of them had children who participated.
Well, while I was showing those photos, did you show a cover?
Yes, this is the article from the Morning Sentinel where Senator Smith is signing this magazine.
Okay.
And the young lady who got it, again, she remembers this fondly. She is now married to a headmaster of a school in Western England, and I hope in the next year or so to go, and we're going to visit with her. So I've been in contact with her, and she remembers this day very well. And there's just one more thing.
And to remind people, that's one of 2 of your in-person autographs, and that one you did not have to pay for.
Oh, not. In fact, it was hers. It was hers. Yeah, and sometimes people use this to sort of burnish their reputation. Orville Faubus was a governor of Arkansas during the 1957 integration crisis. And he lived well into his 90s and was reelected. And I think the offer to explain himself, he jumped at.
Oh, interesting.
Because not only did he sign this, he sent a separate picture and a magazine that he had underlined to show that he wasn't such a bad guy after all. You know, and
what had he underlined?
Well, he had underlined parts of his book. There was a biography of him, of what he had done in Arkansas. You know, how he had improved education and how he had whatever. And then the one more that has a history here was Lloyd Booker, whose ship, the Pueblo, was taken by the North Koreans. The North Koreans still have it, have not returned it. And in his letter, he said, I have a few pieces of Pueblo stationery left. I'll send this to you. So you can do a tale here.
Yeah.
And that this piece of paper was in his office. He grabbed it when he was arrested and held for a year. He brought it home with him and used it to write to a student in Jackman.
Mhm.
So it's got a nice history.
What's the date on the letter?
The date on the letter is 1979.
So this is over a decade after the incident.
Oh, yes, that's right. That's right.
So you're persistent. You're persistent.
Oh, yeah, well, yes, too. When the students did it, we did not include a self-addressed stamped envelope.
Mhm.
I sent him one later when he was on, and he said, "This is the last time I'm doing this. You know, I don't have a franking privilege."
Mhm.
Quite curt. He said, "I'm doing it this time, but not again." Not
Mhm.
again.
Mhm. Well, very good. Thank you so much, David, for sharing. I guess the last question I'll ask is your future plans. I know, like I said, we've been in discussion that
Yes.
things got sort of discombobulated by the pandemic in terms of our exhibit plans, but we're thinking that in 2022, we'll do this 50th anniversary of Watergate using
Great.
the covers.
Okay. Good.
What are your future plans for this collection?
Well, that's a real conundrum, and
Mhm.
I am negotiating now with donating these when the time comes to the Maine State Library.
Okay.
I think since some of these have come from 1, 2, 3 different schools, that it would be very appropriate. And I've even talked to the people in Jackman about maybe donating theirs.
Mhm.
Because all it takes is one person to come in at night, open the safe and walk off with them. You know, I mean, the security's been good, but you never know.
Yeah.
So that's my ultimate plan. I'm going to continue to do it.
Mhm.
And I look forward to it, but I just want to improve my batting average. That's what I want to do.
Well, it's, you know, I never would have thought, it makes sense of why people are reluctant to do it
Yes,
now,
that's right.
but, you know, a sign of the times.
That's right. Exactly right.
Yeah. Well, we also should be thankful that there are still magazine covers.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, of course, with Newsweek now not print,
Mhm.
and U.S. News and World Report not print,
Mhm.
it makes it more difficult.
Yeah. And you were reminding me, it was a couple of years ago, time's a little hazy now, that you did do this exhibit and presentation at the Maine State Library. And
Yes.
I just dropped it. And the Margaret Chase Smith cover was there, and you had invited her niece, Ann Heron, and the Maine State Library gave them
And
a
you were there.
commemorative coin. Yes, and they
And
decided.
you were there. So
Yeah.
you remember Glenn Ross's talk then in
I
general?
do.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And
So
also George Mitchell's niece was there too.
the point being that you may be retired from teaching, but you're still very actively involved with this project.
Well, I've already been booked for a number of, to return to the Maine Medical Association. There's a couple of retirement homes in the Portland area that I'm all set to do.
Mhm.
And I'm willing at the drop of a hat to put these things together and go from there.
Well, I suppose then the way to end is if people wanted to contact you and do something with this project, have you do something, do a presentation, how would be the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, my phone number is 465-3626.
Okay.
And email is dw_Leigh, Leigh, @yahoo.com. But David, I have some very, very nicely professionally done brochures, which I'll send you a supply.
Okay.
If anyone's interested, if they see you, then that would
Yeah,
be
they can contact the library and we can send them one of those brochures.
That's correct.
Yep.
That's correct.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for your time, David, and good luck with the project.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, David.
All right. You take care.
Have a nice